The public takes no vision of what is going off stage. If it could see the authors and settings and how historical tragedies are cooked, it would be a revelation to the public. From Colonel House's diary.
Weizmann's whole plan.
The plan of Weizmann for implementation of a secret operation in Russia he called storm management. That is why Weizmann wanted to have agents sent to Russia who would have a credit of political confidence in the revolutionary environment and be able to influence it.
After the February Revolution, there was a dual power in Russia: the provincial government, headed by the Prince Lvov, and the executive committee of the Petrograd Soviet of the Workers' Deputies, headed by Chilita. From the memoirs of L. Trotsky, the Bolsheviks proposed for consideration my incorporation into the executive committee as a former chairman of the Soviet of 1905.
Weizmann would later write that one of our American agents, well-known international socialist, was immediately accepted and admitted to work at their meeting.
There is, I think,
This is quite probably that the agent about whom Weizmann told was Trotsky himself.
The main site for the meetings, where anti-government and anti-war slogans were tested with the public, was Traveling Circus Modern in the suburbs of Petersburg.
Trotsky made performances in the circus, not simply as a politician, but as an orator. He acts as an illusionist and juggler. He proposed. The huge crowd was listening to him. Illusions, mistaking the wish for the reality.
The whole vast country and the front were turned into a similar circus. In summertime of 1917, Trotsky was in great demand. Most of all, he liked to visit Kronstadt logistics base and a penal battalion. The sailors of the penal battalion and anarchists made the first personal guards of Trotsky. Especially, he got next to Sailor Markin, who became a bodyguard of Trotsky, his wife, and his children. It is interesting that the children of Trotsky and of Kerensky went to the same school. In the end of June 1917, military counterintelligence of Petersburg collected sufficient proof about relations of Lenin with the enemy. On the 1st of June, it was reported to the government about this. Trotsky and Lenin learned about this report. It seemed that debunking was inevitable. But unexpectedly, in Petrograd, unrest broke out, the purpose of which was to distract the authorities from the suspects. In the course of the armed uprising, the strongest support of Trotsky demonstrated itself, so-called Mezhrayansty. The core of the Mezhrayansty consisted of emigrant revolutionaries. They came back due to amnesty of the provincial government from the USA and Europe, following Lenin and Trotsky.
When officers were sent to the apartment where Trotsky lived to arrest him, they had to return to the counterintelligence chief saying, "Colonel, sir, we did not find Trotsky in his apartment, but you know who we saw there? You will never guess. The man was Viktor Chernov, a minister of the government of Kerensky. It was Chernov who, by order of Kerensky, canceled the directive of the counterintelligence service arrest of Trotsky."
Having such a protector, Trotsky was invulnerable. But unexpectedly, in the press, was the story about his detention in Halifax. The former Minister of Foreign Affairs, Melyukov, publicly accused socialist Trotsky in taking $10,000 as a bribe in the USA.
Himself, Trotsky later denied the fact that he had money. He asserted that it was a lie to damage his reputation.
Provisionary government. It had to sign an order to arrest Trotsky. On these days, he did not show himself at home. He spent a night in Tavrochesky 11, in the apartment of the closest Parvist employee, Lorina Luri, the future father-in-law of Bukharina. On the 18th of June, Trotsky was found in Tavrochesky 11 and brought to Kresty prison. There were many chief characters of the future October coup. the acquaintances of Trotsky in Vienna, Zurich, Paris, and New York. Lunacharsky, Anatol Vavchenko, Kollontai, Kamenev, Petrenko, Raskolnikov. Actual unification of 4,000 mezhreansty with the Bolsheviks took place after the July revolt at the absence of its leaders, Lenin and Trotsky. An intermediary was Jacob Sverdlov. Same as Trotsky, he had American connections. In the USA, there lived his brother who suspiciously quickly reached a position of a banker.
120 Broadway has a variety of interesting connections with all of this.
The address of 120 Broadway was a knot of many threads.
Weinstein's office. You also find there at one point...
The building housed an office of one well-known Benny Sverdlov.
Benny Sverdlov.
In real life, his name was Veniamin Sverdlov, and he was a junior brother of Bolshevik Jacob Sverdlov.
Veniamin Sverdlov, after October, would take a post of the Deputy People's Commissar of Railroads.
Sverdlov's main business,
the main task of his was to transfer money, a specific type of private business. The Russian immigrant workers used this enterprise to transfer the money earned from the United States to the accounts of the Russian banks. Naturally, this opportunity could be used for other purposes.
In only half a month, Trotsky was released on bail of 3,000 rubles and, at the absence of Lenin, became a leader of the Petrograd Bolsheviks. In September 1917, Trotsky was elected a chairman of the Petrograd Soviet of Workers' Deputies, this having opened new opportunities for secret preparation to an armed uprising. At night from October 24th to the 25th, in the old style, an armed coup took place. The power was seized on behalf of the Congress of the Soviets. Vladimir Ilyich had a very tired appearance, too dramatic to transition from underground to power. Es schwindelt, I feel dizzy, said Vladimir Ilyich for some reason in Germany.
10 Days That Shake the World, the book by a well-known American journalist, John Reed. This was rather an original chronicle of the October developments of 1917. An unsuspecting reader had an impression, rather staunch, and definite conviction that the real and true leader and organizer of the October coup was not Lenin, to say nothing of Joseph Stalin. And it was accepted in the 30s, 40s, Leon Trotsky. This was reality.
Trotsky began to quickly cope with the duties of an irresponsible ruler. It was in 3 days when he declared merciless execution of the enemies of the Bolsheviks. The word merciless from the time would be one of the most favorite words in Trotsky's vocabulary.
Can it be fortuitous that Trotsky, who had completed non-classical secondary school in Odessa and never had any higher education, a journalist, agitator, and was appointed a People's Commissar of Foreign Affairs, and he came to destroy Russian diplomacy, invincible, as Engels wrote on the next day, after the October coup, as if implementing somebody's immediate and most urgent assignment.
Одно из заданий Троцкого заключалось в опубликовании.
One of the tasks of Trotsky was the publication of all secret treaties of Russia with its allies immediately after the October Revolution.
Something in which Trotsky seems to have had a direct hand. And this was taking these agreements which called for division of territory.
Различных договоров по территориальному делению и других.
Different treaties on territorial division and others, so-called secret diplomacy, now becomes open for the public. This was what Colonel House wanted and aimed at.
Что желал и к чему стремился полковник Хаус.
The rest of the world will live quieter if instead of one Russia, there will be 4 Russias. One in Siberia, the rest a European part divided between European countries. And one more thing. 1 week before the October coup and before his appointment as People's Commissar of Foreign Affairs, Trotsky had a meeting with John Reed and described the future foreign policy of the future Soviet group. After the finish of the war, Europe will be re-established not by the diplomats, but by the proletariat in the form of the United States of Europe. The economic development requires abandonment of the national borders. Trotsky stated later that secret information had been collected by Sailor Markin, who, though writing with mistakes, hammered diplomatic mails, where there it was indeed. Markin felt at home in the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, and even trained Trotsky's children in shooting in the basement of the ministry. The secret treaty of Russia with the Allies in the First World War, published initially in the New York Times and then in British Manchester Gang. The publication was an earthquake that ruined the building of European diplomacy.
At that time, for Britain and for the United States, it was beneficial to have the treaties published, and by means of this to abandon these treaties because there were their commitments before Russia. But the victory was very close. The fruits of the victory were taken by Britain, but primarily to the United States, who had become the main player on the post-war arena.
President Wilson called the publication of the treaties as high standards in the international relations. Secret diplomacy was condemned, and Americans immediately began building their own diplomacy, secret as well. In January 4th, 1918, Colonel House wrote in his diary, "The president was waiting for me. We got to work at 9:30 and finished altering the map of the world at our discretion and finished at 11:30.
This is a preliminary report and recommendations to the American Intelligence Network in relation to the Conference of Versailles, which parts of the west of the Russian Empire had to be independent states. It was recommended that a Ukrainian state be formed as an independent country. It was recommended that Crimea be included into the Ukrainian state, but this was not done. Crimea, if I remember correctly, was part of the Russian Federation to the mid-50s, under Khrushchev.
Cipher message of a German agent to Berlin. Trotsky calls all capitalist countries but the USA the world robbers because it pursues a clever policy, materially supports the Bolshevik government. It was beginning from summer 1917 in Petrograd, under cover of the mission of the U.S. Red Cross, but actually was a mission of Wall Street, was Colonel Raymond Robbins.
Raymond Robbins was a man who
Raymond Robbins wrote from Petrograd to his friend Morgan in New York and asked him to make a contribution. On the same day, Morgan guaranteed a credit of $1 million. Trotsky was presumed to transform Russia in accordance with the plans of his creditors.
But the Bolshevik card was played not only by the Americans, but the British too. Germany demanded for repayment the services it had rendered. The price was a separatist peace and transfer of significant territories.
Lenin had obvious obligations to Germany, and it was the Peace of Brest that Germany primarily gained. Trotsky had obvious obligations to Britain and the United States.
So Trotsky found himself in quite a delicate situation. He tried to maneuver and filled in time.
Had sent Trotsky in order to ensure continuation of the war, then appointment of him as the head of the delegation to the peace negotiations in Brest-Litovsk.
Чтобы Россия продолжала войну, то весьма кстати назначение его главой делегации на мирных переговорах в Брест-Литовске.
Trotsky personally formed the membership of the delegation for negotiations in Brest-Litovsk. The delegation consisted of his Latvian friend Adolf Joha, a husband of Lev Kamenev's sister, a Mej Rayonet's Lev Terekin, and an exiler, Bitsenko, who had killed the Saratov governor, General Sakharov.
The Austrians wanted very much that the negotiations were conducted by Lev Bronstein Trotsky and expected a degree of gratitude from him. This is that they expected that their investments would be repaid by Trotsky.
Proclaiming the slogan, neither war nor peace, Trotsky, by this, provoked a new offensive and stiffening of the provisions of the treaty, and then surrendered his office as the People's Commissar of Foreign Affairs.
Such a short, as it seemed to be, absolutely fortuitous work of Trotsky in the position of the People's Commissar of Foreign Affairs means that he fulfilled the task. He himself said, "We will publish the secret treaties, and the shop is shut up."
As Trotsky wrote, on the 3rd of March, a new delegation signed without the reading of a treaty with Germany. It should seem that it was a failure of Trotsky. However, soon, together with Lenin, he would complete adoption of the resolution which approved his activity in Brest. Lenin then used to say, for the sake of peace with Trotsky, it is worthy to lose Latvia and Estonia.
What does the link? What does unite these two people? This is money. Whose money or political instructions were it? In this, obviously, there is a mystery.
Lenin used Trotsky.
Lenin вплоть до
Lenin used Trotsky till 1924 as a link to American money, because Trotsky could find money where Lenin could not.
где Ленин не мог.
Lenin could not.
27 August 1918, in Berlin, an additional financial agreement was concluded. It was prepared by the ambassador of the Soviet Russia to Germany, a comrade in arms of Trotsky, Adolf Jaffa.
He writes that I have no data about exact information about our debts. And I deafen the Germans with such a cooked-up number of 6 to 7 billion marks. But in reality, it was a signal, but not deafening, that Russia is ready to pay such a sum, because in reality, the Germans' claims were significantly lower.
Jaffa, in the spring and summer of 1918, did not budge from Berlin, accepting representatives of the financial and industrial circles. Jaffa asked permanently for advice of Parvus and Trotsky.
Lev Davidovich was a constant addressee in the messages of Jaffe, and not only was he kept in the know, but I think he was the co-author of this agreement. Without his sanction, it could never happen.
Russian gold was delivered to Germany just 1 month before its capitulation. The old Russian army, corrupted by the Bolsheviks' agitators, Trotsky dismissed at the time of Brest. Colonel House pointed out, Russia possesses huge reserves of trained soldiers and capable generals. The point was that Trotsky would create an army which would be under his control. The bosom friend of Trotsky, Adolf Jaffa, in March 11, 1918, sent a cable to Lenin, who had come to Moscow. Yesterday, at the meeting of the Petrograd CC, unanimously accepted a proposal for appointment of Trotsky as the chief People's Commissar for Military Affairs. Trotsky agreed to take this position, Jaffa. And unexpectedly, in 3 days, Trotsky was appointed People's Commissar for Military and Navy Affairs. At command of the military forces of the Soviet Russia is appointed a man who never before had served in the army. In the Soviet textbooks, they always wrote that intervention of the countries of the Entente was launched to support the White Army, but the declassified documents testified to the opposite.
One of the most important strategic goals of this redivision of the world was divestiture of access of Russia to the Baltic Sea and warm port of Murmansk. And here, there is again a big intrigue.
Colonel House wrote in his diary, Trotsky asked for cooperation in Murmansk and in other issues. Weissman informed House, if Trotsky is reluctant or cannot invite us, then we can call Kerensky. It was 2 weeks before his appointment to the military position. He sent a cable to Murmansk on March 1st, 1918, to the chairman of the local Soviet, to Yuriev, in which it was assigned to accept any cooperation with the Allied missions. Alexei Yuriev, in 1908, immigrated to America. From it, he came back to Murmansk on the 7th of November 1917, and immediately was elected to the Executive Committee of the Murmansk Soviet. From March 6, in Murmansk, landing forces of Britain, France, and USA landed under pretext of rendering assistance to Russia against the Germans. After seizing the territory of the Russian North, The invaders set up concentration camps in which they kept more than 50,000 people, captured the military supply depots, took out flax, fur, hides. Yuriev stated to the foreign journalists that the Murmansk area had to declare its independence from Russia. Moscow tried to protest. Trotsky publicly separated from Yuriev, who later would be sentenced to death. But in 2 years, Yuriev would be freed again. For a certain period, he was even an officer of the American mission. Trotsky again was in a position of sitting on 2 chairs because Germany set forth one more ultimatum on observation of the Treaty of Brest.
Известно, на каких условиях
It is known under what conditions and on whose money Lenin gave back to Russia.
Поддерживая Ленина,
Having supported Lenin, the Germans intended to withdraw their troops in order to use the troops in the spring in 1918 in the front against France and Britain in the territory of France.
на территорию Франции.
And the Bolsheviks had to play in favor of 2 fronts. For a certain period of time, a representative of Britain, USA, Italy, and France set up a special committee for organization of a new army.
The military attaché of France, who was at Moscow at the time, informed Paris.
Сообщает в Париж
On the 23rd of March 1918, Trotsky invited representatives of France, USA, Great Britain, and Italy
Франции,
in order to ask for organization of military aid.
чтобы просить об
General Foch answered the military attaché. I agree with your answer to Trotsky in relation to official cooperation with France for the reorganization of the Russian army.
официального сотрудничества Франции по реорганизации русской армии.
que par tous les moyens, les Français participent.
General Foch wants that by all means at this time, we mean the end of March 1918, the French to participate in the reorganization of the Russian army, which will be able to wage war against Germany.
Способная продолжить войну против Германии.
De continuer la guerre contre l'Allemagne.
On the 5th day of May, the Sovnarkom, on the proposal of Lenin, adopted a resolution, the German ultimatum to yield and the British to decline. And intervention of the Entente went on without any invitation.
The British and Germans did not want Russia to have a strong Russia, and to serve this purpose, it was necessary to rid Russia of its navy in the Baltic Sea. Why? We, the Russian fleet, had dominated the Baltic Sea.
The head of the Marine forces in the Baltic Sea, Alexei Shasny, succeeded in bringing the fleet from those parts which Russia was deprived under the Treaty of Brest. He, through the ice, brought the fleet to Kronstadt and did not lose even one of it.
When 260 ships arrived to Kronstadt, it was clear to everybody this was a deed of high Navy skills.
Unexpectedly, in May 1918, to Kronstadt, a directive from Trotsky came to destroy. From resolution of Trotsky, are all required measures adopted to destroy the fleet, and are there necessary cash deposits for those sailors who are assigned to destroy the ships? Trotsky. Alexei Mikhailovich Shasny is indignant with an attempt to buy the sailors. So, it means that I have recruited Judas of Iscariot and promise each of them 30 iodines. Trotsky accused Captain Shasny in counter-revolution, being the first in Russia who introduced the phrase, the enemy of the people. June 20th, Alexei Shasny appeared before Revolutionary Tribunal. Trotsky made an accusative speech in which he referred to the British Navy officer who demanded for destruction of the fleet, a name of a British Navy agent, Cromie.
You look whatever direction. Everywhere near Trotsky, there was always British spies.
Английские разведчики.
Alexei Shasny was sentenced to death. To kill him, they appointed a Chinese. Trotsky ordered to execute Shasny in the basement of the Revolutionary Military Council, in the building of the former Alexandrovsky College, where there was his office, At 5 p.m., he personally came to see if Shastny was dead. Having been concerned about unrest of the sailors, he refused to give the dead body to the widow and ordered to bury him here, in the building, under the floor. This for a man who saved the Russian Baltic Fleet for Russia.
But maybe the most interesting
Connections of Trotsky with people who fitted the plan of Weissman are of interest.
are his subsequent connections to British agents.
Bruce Lockhart, a British agent in Russia. George Hill, MI6 agent.
Английским офицером, агентом Ми-6 Джорджем Хиллом.
MI6 agent George Hill.
So George Hill accompanied Trotsky in March 1918 during his move from Petrograd to Russia due to the transfer of the capital from Petrograd to Moscow.
Из Петрограда в Москву.
Moves in March 1918.
In the spring of 1918, Sidney Raleigh arrived in the Soviet Russia. That very same Raleigh, who not long ago was busy in commerce with the uncle of Trotsky, Zhivatovsky. But he is now not a merchant, but an English spy, Lieutenant Raleigh. On the same day, Raleigh was accepted in the Kremlin by Bonk Bruvik, chief of administration of Sovnarkom.
Riley was directly interviewed and employed.
Рейли был завербован лично.
Raleigh was personally recruited by the chief of this organization, which we will now call MI6.
Он встретился с Рейли в Лондоне.
He met Raleigh in London in March 1918 and sent him to Russia with a special task.
One of the people
После прибытия в
After arrival in Russia, with several subsequent weeks, he established good relations with General Bonch-Bruvish, whom he visited rather often.
генералом Боч-Бруевичем. А генерал
General Bonch-Bruvish was closely connected with Trotsky.
Троцким.
Mikhail Bonk-Bruvik, a former Tsarist general, head of the Supreme Military Council, brother of the closest comrade in arms of Lenin, chief of administration of Sovnarkom, Vladimir Bonk-Bruvik.
But an important part of that certainly are his meetings.
About the results of this meeting with Bonch-Bruvich, Raleigh reported to London.
Рейли докладывал в Лондон.
These meetings, it certainly is
Bonch-Bruvich was an intermediary between Trotsky and Raleigh.
И Рейли.
intermediary between Riley and Trotsky.
Sidney Raleigh is known to our spectators mainly in the film The Trust. It is still unknown how the Bolsheviks succeeded in drawing him to Moscow, where he was shot. According to one version, Raleigh was betrayed by his former business partner and uncle of Trotsky, Abraham Zhivatovsky. On May 11, 1918, in London, a secret meeting took place. At this meeting, it was decided that the Czechoslovak legions, which was in Russian, should have been armed and used as occupational troops. And 2 weeks later, on May 25th, Trotsky sent a telegram to Sovdep of obvious provocative character. Every Czechoslovak found armed must be shot on the spot. In response, the legions upraised, and the entire Trans-Siberian Railroad was under control of the Western powers. From the First World War, these legions were formed of voluntarily surrendered Czechs and Slovaks who did not want to fight against Russia. The uprising of the Czechoslovak legions is accepted to mean the beginning of the full-scale civil war in Russia.
Lingering civil war fully met the interests and of the USA and of Britain. Huge accumulation of arms needed to be sold to somebody, and this was successfully done, selling arms to the White and to the Red armies, and the Russian were fighting against each other. Trotsky, his maxim known that Entente provided ammunition and arms both to us and to the White.
Trotsky was suspiciously slow when the Czechoslovaks seized Kazan, from which they took out the golden reserves of Russia, which had been kept there during the First World War. In a month, when Trotsky noisily and pompously occupied Kazan, the city was bombed without any obvious reason. It is known that John Kill was an aviation advisor of Trotsky at that time. Trotsky sent a cable to Moscow. "I want to make the war long and popular. Send here correspondents Demian Debny and drawers." The slogan of Trotsky, "Long live civil war," was brought into life, resulting in plague and disaster in the country and the region. Trotsky created a state in his train. In everything he did, you could see that he was intoxicated by power. In him, there was a style of Bonaparte, a court, pomp, shooting, czar's wagons.
The father wanted to catch him when in Russia, but failed. Bronstein always used two trains. The father set an explosive on the railroad, but did not succeed in setting a cord as the instruction required. But the first train was already approaching. He, regardless of this, wanted to blow up the second train, but failed because the second train was too close to the first one.
Sergei Sergeyevich Trotsky, a direct successor of Nikolai Platonovich Trotsky from Yelisavetgrad, whose passport was illegally converted by Lev Bronstein in 1902.
We are all the Trotskys. Konstantin Sergeyevich, this is Nikolai Sergeyevich, this is Maria Sergeyevna, Zina Sergeyevna, Tatiana Sergeyevna, and my wife, Felicia Tata Ianovna. And the fact that he took our family name, we do not care. This does not upset us. The most important thing is what he did to the Russian people. Killing 12 million people, this is what is important.
The world revolution did not happen, and the robbed and ruined Russia was left alone among the adversary or, in the best case, indifferent world. The uncle of Trotsky, Abraham Zhivatovsky, informed Berlin that, in a narrow circle, Lenin confessed that he made a mistake in his calculations for the world revolution. Now he is more interested in locomotives. Zhivatovsky himself, by that time, left devastated Russia and settled in Scandinavia, from where he continued to make business with the Bolsheviks. In the early 20s, the leader and creator of the Red Army, Trotsky, combined authority over the People's Commissariat of Railroads. In his position of the People's Commissar of Railroads, Trotsky was not very popular. The railroad people accepted him as alien and hated him for militarization of the railroads. His CHK people who followed him here together with him from the military department. In the meaning of unreasonable shootings, they did something indescribable.
В начале января 2020 года Троцкий
In the beginning of January 1920, Trotsky introduces the activities of the Moscow Party organization to a new person who has just come from America, some Lomonosov. Lomonosov says that there is a locomotive crisis in Russia, and Trotsky, in the beginning of January 1920, confirms the prediction of Lomonosov.
Yuri Lomonosov. During the Tsarist time, he was a deputy minister of railroads. Under the Bolsheviks, he was a commissary of the Council of the People's Commissars for Railroad Orders, had mysterious connections with some influential people in the West.
Unexpectedly, Lomonosov proposed to make a big order for locomotives abroad, and this order was to be paid with gold, and in addition in advance. The most amazing is the situation now and then in Sweden. In Sweden at the time, there were no locomotive building facilities capable to fulfill the order. And it was proposed that the Swedes first receive the money, then build the production capabilities and fulfill the order. How can it be?
It was from the time of the First World War when Russia had huge locomotive building capacities, up to 2,000 locomotives per year. Locomotives were produced even during the Civil War, and now the locomotive building facilities were idle.
Huge amounts of gold were taken out of the country indeed. Beginning from 1920 and 1921, during the horrible famine, only the locomotive order to spend up to 1/4 of the gold reserves. In Sweden, gold was melted to hide its Russian origin and then transported to the USA.
Русское золото дешево.
Russian gold was cheap. It was like selling the stolen. If Kun Lib bought the Russian gold, then he had to pretend that it had another origin.
Что оно имеет иное происхождение.
It was the bank Kuhn-Leb and Company, which would employ William Wyson, who was dismissed by that time from the British intelligence. The gold went to the USA, and from the USA, people before whom Trotsky had obligations went from the USA. Among the first arrivals, the brothers Hammers, whom Trotsky asserted that in Russia there were unlimited opportunities for investments of American money. In the Urals, the brothers Armand and Victor Hammers were awarded concession of asbestos mines. For the Hammers, they opened storehouses full of fur, platinum reserves, the Urals emeralds.
Here you are, two unknown guys, young men of 24 and 26 years old, without any cover, of no company behind them. They come here to Russia, they come to Trotsky. Well, there are some information that Trotsky was familiar, before the boys came, with the father of the boys.
Trotsky himself always hid his link with Julius Hammer, the father of Victor and Armand. Same as Armand later hid connection of his father with Trotsky. It was Julius Hammer who was especially close to Trotsky when the latter was in New York. And through him, beginning from 1919, Trotsky received supplies for the Red Army, including provisions for his trains. The main interest for the Hammers family in Russia were the unique pieces of art and treasury of the Romanovs.
The main channel of overpumping was the port of Revel. Today, it is Tallinn. It was just kind of a customs hole. That means that through there, one could transport whatever he wanted. Through this city, to there they brought, one can say, tens and hundreds of precious items through this port.
One of the things that Armand Hammer...
One of the tasks of Armand Hammer was search of people, indeed, who were able to buy these things and pay a good price for them in foreign currency.
One way or the other, we could say that the Russian Revolution, what followed...
The Russian Revolution was accompanied with the most grandiose embezzlements in history. Millions and millions of dollars in gold denominations and other values disappeared. Money and reserves were secretly removed from one place to the other.
One place to another.
Beginning from 1921, Trotsky is in charge of the confiscation of the valuables of the church.
Trotsky was a secret figure, that is the brain, the organizer, ideological mastermind of the campaign. This campaign, firstly, was kind of a family business. Trotsky's wife, arts expert, was a director of one museum.
Some icons were bought against a penny. Painted in 15th century, 72 rubles, say 16th century, 175 rubles. Then making a catalog of the Stockholm Museum in the 1990s, I saw acts and protocols on departure trains full of icons from Archangelist. This means that just in Archangelist, they took the icons from the iconostases of the churches. They used to send up expeditions in search for the icons, and at the same time they were trading.
A letter from the head of Glevmusy Trotskaya, the GPU dated of 27 of May, 1922. The Glevmusy asks you to issue an urgent directive on, as fast as possible, transfer of Patriarch Tikhon, accommodated in the former monastery of Don, to the room of the watchman, because presence of the Patriarch do not give any opportunity to continue excursions. Head of the Glevmusy Trotskaya.
Trotsky was singing his last swan song, obviously. His mass popularity, he himself drowned in the blood of shootings. The company of Lenin was patient of him, just because he made a gentleman's deal. But support in the form of a sick, helping hand of Lenin was weaker already. But to independently keep the power in his hands, he did not have.
Lenin's sicknesses opened wide horizons for fakers to broadcast on his behalf. Fearless broadcasting.
Through Krupskaya, the party's leadership pushed some documents known as the Lenin's Will. They were descriptions of the characters of some of the leaders of the party, in which Trotsky was called the most skillful of them all. According to Krupskaya, it was Lenin who dictated these documents. But after all blood strokes he suffered, and according to the records of the doctors, it is clear that Lenin could not dictate anything but bellow.
Any attempt to prove authorship by Lenin led to the fact that most doubted Lenin's authorship. There appears to be no confidence that the documents could have been dictated by him. Krupskaya, within 1923 and 1926, changed her testimony about the last will of Lenin. Krupskaya was closer primarily to Trotsky, both in terms of personal relationships and politically. The first one who could take advantage was Trotsky, and only Trotsky.
The decisive round of struggle was to happen after Lenin's death. Everybody knew that. Very soon he would die. However, Trotsky acted rather mysteriously. He published a bulletin about his poor state of health. And January 18, 1924, he left to the Caucasus to cure himself. And there, in 3 days, he learned about the death of Lenin. But instead of returning, he sent only sorrowful necrology and continued to rest. Trotsky was waiting an invitation to rule, but it did not come for some reason. His fall was slow, but steady, and in the long run, finished in Alma-Ata, to where he was sent in exile January 28. Here, they intercepted a ciphered letter to Trotsky from some Abraham in New York. The government of the country you named guarantees you a visa and immunity in case of voluntary transfer by you of the power into the hands of a person whom you know. The material aspect of the case is absolutely secured. To whom and what kind of power and authority had Trotsky to transfer when he was deprived of any official positions? Who was the author of the ciphered message? Martin Avern, alias Abraham, a member of the Communist League of America. His real name was Mark Abramovich. In the Fourth Trotskyist International, he was responsible for finances. Further, it is said in the message, any correspondence is not permissible, the project you indicated. Your leadership in the struggle against Kento will be, of course, accepted, though it faces some doubts of whether you overstate your popularity and his dullness. Kento, a street hero of the old Tiflis. This is how Trotsky and his proponents named Stalin between themselves. Trotsky understated Stalin indeed. The many-year fight for power had been completely lost. And now Stalin, and no one else, was named the closest comrade in arms and successor of Lenin. And the slogans of Trotsky, let us beat the kulaks and let us accelerate industrialization, will be brought in life by his personal enemy, Joseph Stalin. In 1929, 5 eminent Bolsheviks were sent to the U.S. secretly, among whom was the new People's Commissar for Foreign Affairs, Maxim Litvinov. The envoys of Stalin assured the U.S. bankers that the economic course aimed at industrialization of the USSR would be profitable for the American capital. But in the USA at this time, the Great Economic Depression broke out, and the Soviet industrial orders of the first 5-year plan, to a certain degree, saved it from complete fiasco. And again, Russian gold began flowing to the bank-safe deposits of Wall Street. In 1929, Trotsky would be deported from the USSR and deprived of Soviet citizenship. After many years of travel, the last years of his life he spent in Mexico, where on August 20th, 1940, he would be executed to death by an NKVD agent. Trotsky would be buried in the yard of his homestead in Vienna Street in Mexico. And so much adored by him, America would refuse to take the remains of the fighter for the world revolution.